There's a unique record that Ayrton Senna set, which no other driver in motorsports history has managed to accomplish. What makes this record particularly remarkable is that it cannot be replicated by anyone else. Ayrton Senna will forever be the only driver to achieve this feat. Curious to know what it is? Keep watching. The story takes place during the 1993 Formula One season at the Donington circuit in the UK. Interestingly, Donington wasn't originally on the calendar. The race was supposed to be held at Autopolis in Japan, making it the second Japanese race that year. However, the managing company of the Japanese circuit encountered severe financial difficulties, accumulating a large debt impossible to pay, and had to withdraw from the championship. As a result, Donington stepped in to host the race. Donington is located near Sherwood Forest, famous for the legend of Robin Hood. In 1993, Donington hosted the European Formula One Grand Prix for the first time, marking the third round of that year's World Championship. This race became legendary, often considered Ayrton Senna's greatest race. On Saturday's qualifying day, it's clear that the Williams cars are the top performers on the grid. They secured the front row, with Alain Prost taking pole position. Ayrton Senna, however, wasn't pleased as he qualified in P4, a full 1.5 seconds behind Prost. It was evident that his McLaren was struggling in dry conditions, signaling a tough race ahead for Senna. But let's not forget, we're in the UK, a place known for many beautiful things, though the weather isn't one of them. I might be biased, but the UK's weather is notoriously unpredictable and rainy. Sure enough, come race day, the sky turned dark, and heavy rain clouds gathered, ready to drench the circuit. The rain came pouring down, leading to a wet track, wet tires, and a wet start to the race. And with that, the race began. A few days earlier, Ayrton Senna demonstrated that in wet conditions, no one could compete with him, even if he had a less capable car. As has been noted for years in Formula One, wet conditions level the playing field for car performance, making the driver's skill and courage the deciding factors. From this moment, it seemed like Senna was toying with his competitors, giving them a glimmer of hope. Despite making a mistake at the start and dropping to fifth at the first corner, by the end of the first lap, he had already taken the lead. He didn't just overtake everyone, he left them far behind, practically disappearing from their view. This was astonishing considering that in dry conditions, he had been 1.5 seconds slower in qualifying. His car was clearly not the fastest. Adding to the challenge, Senna had less testing time with his car due to contractual issues at the beginning of the season. These issues were resolved only with a compensation of $1 million per race, paid by the Thursday before each Grand Prix. Otherwise, he wouldn't have competed. Despite such a tumultuous start to the season, which could have shaken his confidence, Senna was still outpacing everyone else. But hang on, because the best part of the story is yet to come. What I've just described isn't even the record I mentioned earlier. The real craziness of that race lies in how differently Formula One was approached back then compared to now. Today, in Formula One, drivers, whether on slick or wet tires, typically have to drive cautiously to preserve their tires. But forget about that cautious approach. Senna had a different strategy. He was aggressively pushing to outperform everyone, even at the cost of his tires. During the race, he made 5 pit stops, more than any other driver on the grid. He pushed so hard that he even ran out of wet tires at one point. Now you might think running out of tires means retirement, but not for Senna. He didn't give up. Instead, he opted for slick tires, a less suitable choice for the wet conditions. Yet, even with these less than ideal tires, he remained the fastest on the track. Of course, he went on to win the race, but to say he merely won feels inadequate. He didn't just win, he dominated. Senna lapped every driver in the field except for Damon Hill, who finished second, a staggering 1 minute and 23 seconds behind Senna. That's 1 minute and 23 seconds in Formula One terms, a significant gap that highlights Senna's absolute mastery that day. Now here's another crazy incident from that day, the one I mentioned earlier, the unbelievable record. When you hear it, you'll probably react with disbelief, thinking, how is that even possible? Well, brace yourself for this. Ayrton Senna set the fastest lap of the race while entering the pits. Yes, you heard that right, setting the fastest lap while going into the pits. Now, you might wonder how on earth that could happen. During one of his pit stops, as Senna was returning to the pits, he noticed that the mechanics weren't ready. Perhaps there was a communication issue, or they simply weren't prepared. Understandably, after making numerous pit stops throughout the race, the mechanics might have grown weary of his frequent visits. So, in a split-second decision, while still in the pit lane, Senna opted to abort the pit stop and continued straight through the pits. Remarkably, in that brief moment, he managed to clock the fastest lap of the race. This feat makes Senna the only driver in Formula One history to achieve the fastest lap while passing through the pits. But how could Senna achieve that when there's usually a speed limit in the pit lane, forcing drivers to slow down? Well, here's something you might not be aware of. Until 1993, Formula One didn't have any speed limits in the pit lane. Yes, you heard it right. They used to race through the pit lane at full throttle. I'm not talking about just going fast. I mean they were flooring it through the pits. Can you imagine how dangerous that was? It's hard to believe. I can't wrap my head around why Formula One didn't implement speed limits in the pit lane for so long. It seems absurd in hindsight. So in that year, Senna was able to set the fastest lap while passing through the pits because there were no speed restrictions in place at the time. One factor that likely aided Senna in achieving this remarkable, albeit unintended record is the pit entry at Donington. It allowed drivers to cut the final corners, giving Senna an advantage. However, after more than 40 years of what can only be described as madness, the use of a pit limiter became mandatory in free practice sessions starting in 1993. Then, from 1994 onwards, it was also compulsory during races. This change was largely due to a sustained campaign led by Michele Alboreto, who even voluntarily limited his own speed before the official rules were enforced. So because of this, Senna's record will likely stand the test of time. It's a piece of Formula One history that will remain etched forever, synonymous with one name, Ayrton Senna. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help the channel and check the video on the screen as well. Thank you.